I'm a 22-year-old woman, and what happened to me between September and November of 2024 still keeps me awake at night. I moved to a small fishing village on the Oregon coast for a research position with a marine biology team. The town had maybe 400 people and sat right on the edge of the Pacific. I am originally from Portland, so the coast was not completely foreign to me, but living in such an isolated place was different. The job paid well, and I needed the experience for graduate school. I found a small wooden house to rent right on the beach about half a mile from town. It was built in the early 1980s, and the landlord, Mrs. Chen, seemed eager to have someone stay there. The house had 2 bedrooms with large windows facing the ocean. The wooden floors creaked whenever I walked, and the place sat only 30 feet from the beach. Mrs. Chen handed me the keys and gave me a quick tour that lasted maybe 15 minutes. She pointed out the water heater and the breaker box, then left without lingering. I thought it was odd how quickly she departed, but I was excited to settle in. My first week consisted of working at the research station where I collected marine samples and recorded water temperatures. The work was fascinating, and my supervisor, Dr. Hayes, seemed pleased with my attention to detail. I spent my evenings exploring the town, which had a small grocery store, a coffee shop, a post office, and a bar where fishermen gathered after work. The locals were friendly enough, but I sensed they kept outsiders at a distance. Around day 8 or 9, I started noticing something about the tides. Every night at exactly 10:30, the tide would surge higher than normal. The waves crashed against the shore with unusual force, and there was a sound mixed in with the water. It was not just the typical rush of waves, but something else underneath. A low resonance that reminded me of whale songs, but deeper and more unsettling. I would stand at my living room window watching moonlight reflect off the dark water and feel a strange uneasiness I could not explain. I told myself it was just the natural rhythm of the Pacific Ocean and nothing more. On my 10th night in the house, I was sitting in the living room reading through research reports. At 10:25, I heard the tide beginning to rise and glanced out the window. Something on the beach caught my attention in the moonlight. At first I thought it was driftwood, but the shape seemed wrong. I stood up and moved closer to the window. The shape was tall, maybe 5 or 6 feet, and it stood upright near the water's edge. It was completely motionless, facing toward my house. My heart started beating faster. Maybe it was someone taking a late-night walk, but why would they just stand there without moving? I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the window, but the beam was not strong enough to illuminate anything clearly. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold ocean wind hit me immediately, and I called out into the darkness. "Hello, is someone there?" The sound of crashing waves swallowed my voice. There was no response. I stood in the doorway for about 20 seconds, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. I closed and locked the door, then returned to the window. The shape had vanished. I tried to convince myself it had been a shadow from a rock or a piece of driftwood, or maybe just my imagination playing tricks. But sleep did not come easily that night. I kept getting up to check the windows. The next morning at work, I mentioned to my colleague Sarah that I had seen someone on the beach the previous night. She was 35 years old and had worked at the station for 6 years. "What time was this?" she asked. "Around 10:30. Her expression changed slightly, but she did not say anything more. That afternoon, when I returned home, I walked along the beach to the spot where I had seen the figure. There were no footprints in the sand and nothing unusual, just empty beach and a few seabirds. That night I decided to watch more carefully. I sat by the living room window starting at 10:15. At 10:28 the tide began its surge. At 10:32 I saw the shape again. This time it was not at the water's edge. It stood in the middle of the beach, approximately 40 feet from my house, much closer than the night before. It remained completely still, facing my direction. I grabbed my phone and used the camera to zoom in, but the image on the screen only showed a dark, tall, thin form. The proportions seemed wrong somehow, not quite human. I decided not to go outside this time. Instead, I went to my bedroom and retrieved my binoculars that I used for observing seabirds during work. When I returned to the window, the shape had disappeared. I searched the entire beach through the binoculars but saw nothing. I stayed awake watching until 1 in the morning. Nothing appeared again, but I barely slept that night. Every hour I would wake up and check the window. By morning I was exhausted and struggled to concentrate at work. During lunch, Sarah asked if I was feeling all right. I decided to tell her more details about the figure I had been seeing on the beach for 2 consecutive nights. She was quiet for a long moment. "You should be careful," she finally said. "Do you know something about this?" I asked. "Just don't stay outside after 10 at night." She stood up. "I have to get back to work." She would not explain further. That evening, the sense of unease grew stronger as I drove home. I checked every door and window to make sure they were locked. Around 9, I made dinner but could barely eat. At 10:15, I turned off all the lights in the house except for a small lamp in the hallway. I sat in the darkness of the living room watching through the window. At exactly 10:30, the tide surged and waves crashed violently against the shore. At 10:33, the figure appeared. This time it was very close, only about 20 feet from my house, standing on the sand near the wooden steps that led from my back door down to the beach. I could see it much more clearly now. It stood approximately 6.5 feet tall and was unnaturally thin. It stood at a slight angle with its arms hanging down far longer than normal human proportions. It appeared to be covered in something wet and rough-textured rather than wearing clothes. The figure stood completely motionless facing the living room window where I sat. I had the distinct feeling it knew I was watching. My hands trembled. I wanted to call 911, but I was afraid to move. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, the figure began moving backward. It retreated slowly toward the ocean, never turning around. It kept facing the house as it moved in reverse until it disappeared into the darkness near the water. I sat frozen in the dark until 3 in the morning with a large kitchen knife beside me. The next morning, I called in sick to work. At 9, I drove into town and went to the grocery store. The owner, Bill, was about 60 years old and was stocking shelves. "Excuse me," I said. "Has anyone reported seeing anything strange on the beaches lately?" He stopped working and looked at me. "Why do you ask?" "I've been seeing something near my house at night. I'm renting the place from Mrs. Chen down on the beach." His face went pale. "You need to talk to Mrs. Chen about that." "Do you know what I'm talking about?" I pressed. He shook his head. "Some places around here have their own history. That's all I can say." He turned away and continued stocking shelves, clearly ending the conversation. I drove to the coffee shop and ordered from the owner, Linda, who was around 50. I tried asking about the town's history in a casual way. She was friendlier than Bill and told me about how the fishing industry had sustained the town since the 1950s. "Have there been any strange occurrences here over the years?" I asked. She hesitated. "The ocean has its own secrets." "What do you mean?" "Some fishermen have gone missing over the years. That's normal for a fishing town. But there were a few people who vanished right from shore during king tides in October and November. This was back in the 1990s mostly. I don't remember all the details." I thanked her and left. I tried calling Mrs. Chen multiple times, but she never answered. I sent text messages that went unreturned. When I got back to the house that afternoon, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. But I had signed a 4-month lease and paid first month plus deposit. I did not have enough money to just abandon everything and start over somewhere else. I made a decision. One more night. If anything happened, I would leave regardless of the financial loss. I prepared carefully that evening. I charged my phone fully, kept my car keys in my pocket, and packed a backpack with clothes so I could run immediately if needed. The evening sky was overcast and the wind picked up as darkness fell. I double-checked every door and window lock. The back door that faced the beach had a deadbolt, but I still did not feel safe. I pushed my sofa against it for extra security. At 10, I sat in the darkened living room with my flashlight and phone beside me. At 10:28, I heard the tide rising more forcefully than any previous night. I looked out the window. The moon was bright and full. At 10:31, the figure appeared. But it was not on the beach. It stood on the wooden steps directly outside my back door, only about 6 feet from the glass. I could see it completely. It was over 7 feet tall and horrifyingly thin with ribs protruding visibly. Its skin, or whatever covered it, was a grayish-blue color slick with moisture and covered in scales like fish skin. Its arms were grotesquely long, nearly reaching its knees, and there were thin membranes between its elongated fingers. The head was vaguely human-shaped but stretched, and the face had 2 deep black sockets where eyes should be. There was no clear nose, just small slits, but it had a mouth. A horizontal gash that hung slightly open, revealing rows of sharp needle-like teeth inside. It stood perfectly still, staring into the house. I felt like it was studying me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. After 30 seconds that felt eternal, it tilted its head slowly to one side as if listening. Then it raised one webbed hand with long claws and placed it flat against the glass door. I heard the scraping sound of claws on glass. Then it pressed its face against the window. Its breath or something created fog on the glass. Those black, empty eye sockets stared directly at me. I could not hold back anymore. I screamed. I turned and ran to the front door. I fumbled with the lock and burst outside. I did not look back. I ran to my car in the driveway and hit the unlock button on my key remote. I jumped inside and locked the doors. My hands shook so badly I could barely start the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was no longer at the back door. It was coming around the side of the house, moving toward my car. Its movement was strange, almost like it was swimming through the air. I finally got the car started and backed out onto the road. In my mirror, I saw it standing in the middle of the driveway, watching my car disappear. I drove straight to the only motel in town and parked directly in front of the office. I sat shaking in my car for 10 minutes before I could bring myself to go inside. I rented a room, locked the door, and pushed the dresser against it. I sat on the bed, hugging my knees, trembling until sunrise. The next morning around 7, I drove back to the house in full daylight. The ocean was calm with gentle waves as if nothing had happened. I went inside quickly and started grabbing my essential belongings. As I passed the back door, I stopped. There were marks on the glass, a handprint with 5 long fingers and visible webbing between them. Below it were streaks of seawater that smelled strongly of brine and rot. There were light scratch marks on the wooden door frame. I took photos with my phone. I packed as fast as I could. Clothes, laptop, important documents. I left everything else behind. I put my keys on the kitchen table and called Mrs. Chen, leaving a voicemail that I was breaking the lease and she could keep the deposit. Before leaving town, I stopped at the small library. It opened at 9 and I waited outside. The librarian, Amanda, was young, maybe 25, and had moved from Eugene for the job. I asked about the town's history, particularly regarding the coastline. She helped me find old newspaper archives and local records. I spent 90 minutes reading through everything. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1994, a woman vanished from a beach house during an October night at high tide. It was the house I had been renting. The back door was found open, but there was no sign of forced entry. She simply disappeared. In 2001, a retired fisherman went missing from the same house in November during king tides. In 2008, a young married couple rented the house. The husband vanished. His wife told police she saw a creature from the ocean, but nobody believed her. They assumed she was in shock after her husband left her. In 2015, an intern disappeared from that same house. Every case happened in October or November during the highest king tides of the year. None were thoroughly investigated. They were all concluded as voluntary disappearances or drowning accidents. I also found old local legends. Native fishermen used to tell stories about people from the deep who emerged during the highest tides searching for humans to pull back into the ocean. They called it the Tide Walker. Nobody stayed near the shore on those nights. I thanked Amanda and left the library. I drove away from that town, looking back once in my rearview mirror at the gray ocean stretching endlessly. I drove straight to Portland. I quit my job via email citing personal reasons. It took 3 weeks to find a new apartment and new work. Now, several months later, I still cannot sleep well. I have nightmares about that eyeless face pressed against the glass and those webbed hands with their 2 long fingers. I moved to the eastern part of Oregon, as far from the coast as I could get. I will never live near the ocean again. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if it is still there waiting on that beach for the next person to rent that house. And I wonder how many others Mrs. Chen has sent to feed whatever lives in those waters. I hope nobody else makes the same mistake I did. The Pacific Northwest has beauty, but it also has darkness, and some things should never be disturbed. I am a 32-year-old forest ranger working in Washington state. I have been doing this job for 7 years now, ever since I moved here from Idaho. My station covers about 15,000 acres of national forest near a small town called Pinewood. The population is around 600 people, mostly loggers and retirees. Most days are routine. I check trails, monitor wildlife, help lost hikers. But in August of 2024, something happened that changed how I see my job forever. This case still keeps me awake at night. It was a Sunday morning, August 18th, and I was at the ranger station drinking my first cup of coffee. The sun was just starting to come up over the mountains, and I was looking forward to a quiet day. Then my phone rang. It was 6:15 in the morning, which was unusual. I answered and heard a man's voice on the other end. He sounded panicked. He said his name was Derek, and he was out hiking early to catch the sunrise for some photos. He had walked past a campsite at Cascade Point, and something was wrong. There were 2 tents set up, a minivan parked at the lot about 200 yards away, but no people anywhere. He said he called out but got no response. What worried him was that everything looked like people had just been there. The tents were still up. Gear was scattered around, and he could see a camp stove with what looked like breakfast food still sitting on it. I told Derek to stay exactly where he was and not to touch anything. I called my colleague Marcus, and we drove out there together. It took us about 25 minutes to reach Cascade Point. When we arrived, Derek was waiting by the trailhead. He looked shaken up. He pointed toward the campsite and said he had not gone any closer after he called me. Marcus and I walked down to the site. Derek was right. 2 large family tents were set up about 10 feet apart. Outside one tent there were small shoes, the kind kids wear, lined up neatly. A few toys were scattered on the ground. The camp stove was set up on a portable table, and there was a pot on it with what looked like oatmeal inside, completely cold. The food was congealed like it had been sitting there for hours. A cooler sat nearby, still full of food and drinks. Marcus checked inside the first tent. The sleeping bags were unzipped and pushed aside like people had gotten out of them in a normal way. Clothes were folded in a corner. A tablet, the kind kids use, was sitting on top of one of the sleeping bags. I checked the second tent. Same thing. 2 adult sleeping bags, partially unzipped, personal items organized neatly. On the ground near the tent entrance was a cell phone in a pink case. We walked over to the parking area. The minivan was locked. I could see 2 car seats in the back row through the window. There were no keys visible inside the vehicle. I walked back to the information board near the trailhead and checked the registration sheet. A family named Williams had signed in on Friday afternoon. Robert Williams, age 39, his wife Jennifer, age 37, and their 2 children, Emma, age 9, and Lucas, age 6. They were from Seattle. They had listed their permit for 3 days and 2 nights. There was a phone number written down. I pulled out my phone and called it. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Marcus was walking around the perimeter of the campsite. He called out to me. He had found something. About 50 feet from the tents on a trail that led down toward a creek, there was a hiking shoe. It was an adult-sized shoe, a women's shoe. It was just sitting there in the middle of the path like someone had stepped right out of it. I radioed the sheriff's department. 2 deputies arrived about 40 minutes later. We told them what we had found and they started taking notes. One of them asked if we had any history of problems in this area. I told him no. This was a popular family camping spot. We had never had any serious incidents here. We decided to follow the trail down toward the creek. About 100 feet further down, we found the second shoe. It was the matching shoe to the first one. We kept walking. The trail wound down through thick forest for about a quarter-mile before it reached the creek. When we got there, we searched the area carefully. There was no sign of anyone. No footprints in the soft dirt near the water, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. By early afternoon, we had 4 volunteers from town helping us search. The sheriff called in the county search and rescue team. They arrived around 2 in the afternoon with tracking dogs. The handlers brought the dogs to the campsite and let them smell clothing from inside the tents. The dogs immediately picked up a scent and led us down the same trail toward the creek. But when we reached the creek, the dogs stopped. They circled around, sniffing the ground, but they seemed confused. One of the handlers said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "This is strange. These dogs are trained to track for miles, but they are acting like the scent just disappears right here." We searched until dark and found nothing. I did not go home that night. I stayed at the ranger station, going over maps and trying to figure out where this family could have gone. Marcus stayed with me. We barely slept. The next morning, Monday, August 19th, the search resumed. We had about 40 people now, including volunteers from neighboring towns. The Coast Guard sent a helicopter to do aerial searches. We covered a radius of 5 miles from the campsite, checking every trail, every clearing, every possible place they could be. Around 4 in the afternoon, one of the volunteers called in on the radio. He had found something about 3 miles east of the campsite. It was a backpack. We hiked out to his location and sure enough, there was a blue backpack sitting on the ground next to a fallen log. I opened it carefully. Inside was a map of the area, a compass, 3 full water bottles, a first aid kit, energy bars, and a wallet. I checked the ID in the wallet. Robert Williams. This was his backpack. But there was no sign of Robert or his family anywhere near that spot. We searched the area thoroughly. Nothing. It made no sense. Why would he leave his backpack here? It had everything you would need for survival in the forest. Water, food, navigation tools. Why abandon it? Family members started arriving from Seattle. Robert's mother came to the ranger station. She was devastated. She kept asking me if we had found anything. I had to tell her about the backpack, about the campsite, about how we had no idea where they were. She broke down crying and said, "They were supposed to come home yesterday. Robert always calls me when they get back. Always." That evening, the sheriff held a press conference asking for any witnesses to come forward. A couple who had been camping in a different area came forward. They said they had driven past Cascade Point around 8 o'clock on Saturday night. They saw a campfire burning and heard children laughing. Everything seemed normal. So sometime between Saturday night and Sunday morning, this family of 4 had vanished. On Tuesday, a detective from the sheriff's department went through security camera footage from the forest entrance station. The footage showed the Williams family's minivan entering the forest at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. You could clearly see 4 people in the vehicle: Robert driving, Jennifer in the passenger seat, and 2 kids in the back. No other vehicles followed them in. Then the detective found something else. Footage from late Saturday night, around 11 o'clock, showed a figure walking out of the forest on foot. The person was wearing a dark hoodie and the camera angle made it impossible to see their face. The figure walked along the highway for a bit and then disappeared into the darkness. The person had no vehicle. The detective checked footage from a gas station 3 miles down the road. The figure never showed up there. Whoever it was had simply vanished. We continued searching on Tuesday with no results. By Wednesday morning, we had been looking for this family for 4 days. I was exhausted and starting to lose hope. Then at 6:30 on Wednesday morning, my radio crackled to life. A hiker had called 911. He had found them, all four of them. They were at a small lake about 8 miles west of Cascade Point, in the complete opposite direction from where we had found the backpack. I jumped in my truck and drove as fast as I could. Paramedics had already arrived when I got there. The scene I walked into was one of the strangest things I have ever witnessed. The Williams family was sitting on the shore of the lake, all four of them. Robert, Jennifer, and their 2 children. They were sitting in a row, completely still, staring straight ahead at the water. They were not talking. They were not moving. They just sat there. The paramedics were trying to talk to them but getting no response. I walked closer. Their eyes were open. They were breathing normally, but it was like they were not really there. Jennifer had her arms around both children. Robert sat beside her. They looked like statues. I knelt down in front of Robert and said his name. He did not react. I waved my hand in front of his face. Nothing. The paramedic next to me checked their vital signs. He said, "Vitals are normal. Heart rate, blood pressure, everything is fine, but they are not responding to us." The family was loaded into ambulances and taken to the hospital in the nearest larger town, about 30 miles away. I followed in my truck. At the hospital, doctors examined all four of them. No injuries, no signs of trauma, no drugs or toxins in their blood work. They were physically fine. After about 6 hours, something changed. Jennifer blinked a few times and looked around. Then Robert did the same. The children started to cry and clung to their mother. They were coming out of whatever state they had been in. I was allowed to speak with Robert later that evening. He was sitting up in bed, looking confused and frightened. I asked him what had happened. He said, "I do not know. I remember we had breakfast Sunday morning. Emma wanted to go down to the creek. We were getting ready to go. Then there is nothing. The next thing I remember is sitting by that lake and people were talking to us." Jennifer gave a similar account. She remembered hearing something that morning. She said, "I heard a sound coming from the forest. It was strange. I cannot describe it. Then everything just goes blank." The children remembered even less. Lucas, the 6-year-old, said he was playing with his toy cars. Emma said she was reading. Neither of them remembered anything after that. The FBI was called in to investigate. They considered every possibility: abduction, drugging, some kind of psychological episode, but none of it made sense. How do 4 people travel 8 miles through dense forest, leaving almost no trace, and end up sitting by a lake with no memory of how they got there? How does a backpack end up 3 miles in one direction while the people end up 8 miles in another direction? The figure on the security camera was never identified. Nobody in town recognized the description. Nobody came forward. After 2 weeks, the FBI closed their investigation. They had no answers. The case was classified as an unsolved mystery. The Williams family went back to Seattle. Robert's mother called me a few weeks later. She said they were trying to move on, but the kids were having nightmares. Robert and Jennifer had both started seeing therapists. None of them wanted to talk about what happened. The campsite at Cascade Point was closed for a month while investigators went over every inch of it. They found nothing that explained anything. Eventually, it was reopened to the public. I still work here. Marcus transferred to a different station 6 months later. He told me he could not keep working in these woods after what happened. I understood. Some days I feel the same way. I drive past Cascade Point regularly on my patrols. Every time I do, I think about the Williams family. I think about those 3 missing days. I think about the figure walking out of the forest at 11 o'clock at night. I think about Robert's backpack sitting 3 miles east while his family ended up 8 miles west. The backpack is still in the evidence locker at the sheriff's department. Sometimes I go look at it. I open it up and check the contents, like maybe I missed something the first time. But there is never anything new to find. I have watched that security camera footage dozens of times. The figure in the hoodie walking along the highway. I have tried to find any detail that might identify them. But the footage is too grainy and the angle is too poor. What happened to the Williams family during those 3 days? Where did they go? How did they get to that lake? Why do they not remember anything? Who was the person leaving the forest that night? I do not have answers to any of those questions. Nobody does. All I know is that something happened in these woods in August of 2024 that cannot be explained. 4 people lost 3 days of their lives and have no memory of where they went or what they did. And somewhere in this small town or in these forests, there might be someone who knows the truth. That is what keeps me up at night. Not knowing, not understanding, working in a place where something like this happened and being no closer to understanding it now than I was the day we found that empty campsite. I love my job. I love these forests. But after this case, I see them differently. There are things that happen out here that we cannot explain, things that remind us how little control we really have. The Williams family is safe now. They are home with their loved ones. But those 3 days are gone forever, and whatever happened during that time went with them. I am Sarah Chen, 28 years old, and I work as a night delivery driver for a logistics company in Portland. My job is to run the coastal route 101 from Portland to Brookings every night from Monday through Friday, delivering packages to small stores along the Oregon coast. I started this job in May of 2024. The route runs along the coastline, through dense forests and tiny towns with populations under 300 people. There are stretches of that road where I will not see another car for almost an hour. I had gotten used to the loneliness on that road until I met him. It was early June of 2024, around 2 in the morning. I was driving south on Route 101, and I had just passed the town of Cannon Beach. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of my van's engine. I came up to rest stop number 23, which was about 35 miles south of Portland. It was just a small parking area with a public restroom, a broken vending machine, and a faded sign. I was not planning to stop, but as my headlights swept across the rest stop, I saw someone standing next to the sign. It was a young man, maybe 25 or 30 years old. He was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was just standing there, not moving, and his face was pale white. I slowed down and he suddenly walked toward my van. My first instinct was to keep driving, but something about the way he looked made me stop. He came up to my window and knocked gently. I rolled it down halfway. He looked up at me and his eyes were filled with fear. His hands were shaking. He said in a quiet voice, "I need to get to Cedar Ridge Police Station." I knew Cedar Ridge was about 12 miles down the road on my route. I hesitated for a moment because picking up strangers at 2 in the morning is not exactly safe, but he looked terrified. I thought maybe he had been in some kind of trouble or witnessed something bad. I told him to get in. He climbed into the passenger seat and immediately sat back without saying another word. I tried to make conversation. I asked him what happened, if he was okay, if I should call someone for him. He did not answer any of my questions. He just stared straight ahead out the windshield. Every few seconds, he would glance at the side mirror like he was afraid someone was following us. The drive to Cedar Ridge took about 15 minutes. The whole time, he did not say a single word. When we pulled up to the police station, he mumbled a quick thank you, got out of the van, and walked straight to the front door. I watched him go inside, waited a few seconds, and then continued on my route. I figured he had been involved in some kind of incident and needed to file a report. I did not think much about it after that. It was late July of 2024, around 2:15 in the morning. I was driving the same route and I came up to rest stop number 23. As my headlights lit up the area, I saw him again. He was standing in the exact same spot, wearing the exact same gray hoodie and jeans. I hit the brakes hard and my van jerked to a stop. My heart was pounding. I could not believe it was the same person. I rolled down my window and called out to him. "Are you the guy I gave a ride to last month?" He did not answer. He just walked up to my van, looked at me with those same terrified eyes, and said in a shaking voice, "I need to get to Cedar Ridge Police Station." It was the exact same voice, the exact same request, the exact same look of desperation. I was completely confused. I asked him, "Why are you here again? What is going on?" He did not respond. He just repeated, "Please take me to the police station." I did not know what else to do. I was worried that he was in some kind of danger, so I told him to get in. He climbed into the passenger seat and sat there in complete silence. The drive was identical to the first time. He stared out the window, kept glancing at the mirror, and did not say a word. When we got to Cedar Ridge Police Station, he got out, thanked me quietly, and walked toward the front entrance. This time, I sat in my van for about 3 minutes watching the building. I did not see any lights turn on inside. I did not see any movement. It felt wrong, but I convinced myself that maybe he was dealing with some ongoing legal issue and had to keep coming back to the station. I eventually drove off and finished my route. It was mid-September of 2024, around 2 in the morning. I was approaching rest stop number 23 and I already felt anxious. Part of me hoped he would not be there, but as I got closer, I saw him standing in the same spot wearing the same clothes. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I stopped the van about 20 feet away from him and got out. I walked toward him and said firmly, "What is happening? Why do you keep showing up here? Do you need help?" He looked at me with that same desperate expression and said, "Cedar Ridge Police Station. I have to get there." I decided right then that I was not going to let him disappear this time. I told him to get in and I said, "I am going inside with you this time. We are going to figure out what is going on." He did not respond. He just climbed into the passenger seat. During the drive, I kept trying to talk to him, but he was completely silent. His hands were trembling and I noticed something strange. He was not blinking. He just stared straight ahead without moving his eyes. When we arrived at the police station, I parked right in front of the entrance. I said, "Let's go inside together." He got out of the van and started walking toward the front door. I followed him, staying about 10 steps behind. He reached the door, pushed it open, and walked inside. I was right behind him, maybe 5 seconds later. I pushed the door open and walked in. Inside, there was only one female officer sitting at the front desk, drinking coffee. There was nobody else in the room. I looked around, confused, and then I asked her, "Where did the man who just walked in go?" She looked at me with a puzzled expression and said, "I have not seen anyone come in. You are the first person I have seen tonight." I felt my stomach drop. I asked her again, "A man in a gray hoodie just walked through this door 5 seconds ago. Where is he?" She shook her head. "Ma'am, I have been sitting here for the past 3 hours. Nobody has come in." I ran back outside and looked around the entire building. There was nowhere he could have gone. The parking lot was empty except for my van and 2 police cars. He had completely vanished. After that night, I could not sleep. I kept replaying the moment he disappeared in my head. The next morning, I called my supervisor and asked to be switched to a different route. I made up an excuse about needing to be closer to home for family reasons. My supervisor agreed and moved me to the I-5 corridor route for the rest of September. I felt relieved not having to drive Route 101 anymore, but I still felt uneasy. In early October, 2 other drivers called in sick and the company was short-staffed. My supervisor called me on October 12th and said, "Sarah, I need you to run the old route tonight. There is nobody else available." I refused. I told him I could not do it. He said, "If you do not take this shift, I am going to assume you do not want to work here anymore." I needed the job, so I agreed. That night, I left at 11 and my stomach was in knots the entire time. I kept telling myself that if I saw him again, I would not stop. I would just keep driving. It was 1:45 in the morning when I approached rest stop number 23. The road was pitch black and there were no other cars around. My heart was racing as I got closer. When I reached rest stop number 23, I slowed down and looked at the spot where he always stood. He was not there. Instead, there was a small white memorial sign planted on the side of the road right where he used to stand. I hit the brakes and pulled over. I sat there for a moment, staring at the sign. My hands were shaking. I knew I had to get out and look at it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. I walked over to the sign and turned on my phone's flashlight. The sign read, "In memory of Marcus Webb. Born February 14, 1996. Disappeared October 19, 2019. Forever in our hearts." I did the math in my head. If he was born in 1996 and disappeared in 2019, he was 23 years old when he vanished. That was 5 years ago. Below the text, there were faded plastic flowers and a photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. I shined my light on the photo and my blood went cold. It was him. The same face, the same eyes, just slightly younger. It was the man I had picked up 3 times. I took a picture of the memorial with my phone, then backed away toward my van. My legs felt weak, and I could barely hold the steering wheel as I got back inside. I could not keep driving my route. I turned the van around and drove straight to Cedar Ridge. It was 2:30 in the morning, and the only place open was a 24-hour diner called Tina's. I parked and went inside. There was a woman in her 50s wiping down the counter. Her name tag said Tina. I walked up to her and asked, "Do you know anything about Marcus Webb?" She stopped wiping and looked at me with sadness in her eyes. "You know Marcus." I told her I needed to know what happened to him. She sat down across from me and started talking. Tina said, "Marcus was my friend Sarah's son. On October 19, 2019, Marcus was driving home from Eugene. He called his mother at 1:30 in the morning and told her he had just witnessed an attack at rest stop 23. He said he saw a man hitting a woman and he was scared. He told his mom he was driving to Cedar Ridge Police Station to report it." Tina paused and took a breath. Marcus never made it to the police station. His car was found abandoned at rest stop 23 with the keys still in the ignition and his phone on the seat. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. He just vanished. The police investigated, but they never found any evidence of the attack Marcus said he saw. Nobody knows what happened to him. I felt chills run down my spine. I told Tina that I had picked up someone matching Marcus's description 3 times. I described everything: the gray hoodie, the terrified eyes, the request to go to the police station. Tina started crying. She said, "A few other people have told me they have seen him too. I think Marcus is still trying to get to the police station. He never finished what he set out to do. He never got to report what he saw." I sat in my van until 4 in the morning, unable to move. At 7, I called my supervisor and told him I was quitting the Route 101 assignment. He was angry and said I was being unprofessional, but I did not care. I told him I would only do city routes from now on. The company was desperate for drivers, so they agreed to transfer me. A few weeks later, I spoke with 2 other drivers who had worked Route 101. The first driver, Dave, told me he saw Marcus once in August but did not stop because he was scared. He said when he looked in his rearview mirror, Marcus was gone. The second driver, Jennifer, told me she had given Marcus a ride twice in 2023. She had the exact same experience I did. Jennifer said, "I think he is trying to finish something, but he cannot. I do not know if Marcus knows he has been missing for 5 years. I do not know if he is stuck in that night, replaying it over and over, trying to reach the police station to report what he saw. I feel guilty that I could not help him, but I do not know how anyone could. I have not gone back to Route 101, especially not to rest stop 23. My job now takes an extra 2 hours every night because I have to take a different route, but I accept that. I do not want to see Marcus again. I do not want to see that desperation in his eyes, knowing that no matter how many times I drive him to that police station, he will never make it inside. Some things in this world cannot be explained, and some people get stuck between two worlds, trying to finish what they could not complete.